It's my pleasure to welcome back Julien Pham from 3CC, Third Culture Capital, for a catch-up conversation. Julien, welcome back.
Hi, Sharmana. It's a pleasure to be back.
All right, let's start catching up. And it's been a while. I was looking at when you came last time. It's been a while. So, what's going on in the fund? What are you seeing trends wise? Let's catch up.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. I can't remember exactly the date that I was in, but I was definitely launching Fund One amidst the turbulence of post-pandemic and a tough funding environment. I would say it's still a relatively tough funding environment now that we're raising Fund Two, but we've learned a lot of lessons in the past 3 years. So the portfolio for Fund One has grown to 15 companies, and we are about to launch a Fund Two, hopefully in 2024, early 2025.
Okay, let's double click down on Fund One. Remind me the size of Fund One.
So Fund One was a $5 million pilot fund that allowed us to write pre-seed and seed checks in health tech companies mostly.
I remember health tech as your focus. So let's talk about the kinds of companies you've invested in, some of the concepts, markets that you chose to invest in. And what was your investment thesis and how did that pan out as you invested in them and as those companies started executing in the industry?
Yeah.
Big examples you want to focus on.
Big questions, yeah. Maybe it's easier if I talk a little bit about the thesis. Now, we're very proud of having built a really unique thesis and ethos at 3CC. A lot of this has been kind of based on my own personal and professional experience, going from being a physician to a founder entrepreneur to now being a founder GP of a healthcare fund, VC fund. The notion and the name of the fund, Third Culture Capital, is broadly derived from this notion of being a third culture kid or having a third culture mindset. As you know, because it is a little bit of your own experience, Ramana, but the classical definition of a third culture kid is a child who grows in a culture that's different from their parents or their passport country. And so they may grow up in an environment that doesn't look like them. But then when they go back to their quote unquote passport country or home country or other parents' country, they may have reverse culture shock and don't feel like they fit in completely either. And so they're kind of stuck between one culture and another, and they're part of this universal third culture. We've expanded this to more of a mindset because today people are just traveling and living globally. And so it's not so much about what language you speak or what country you're from, et cetera, but what do you bring to the table that's completely unique? How, it's about diversity of thought, diversity of background, and diversity of experiences. And we believe that individuals who've gone through this unique journey of having diversity of experiences, not only do they tend to be more adaptable, more resilient, but have a very broad lens on how to build innovation for societies throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead.
Well, I was asking in that context, are you then investing in companies that are outside of the United States, outside of any particular geography that you've chosen, or is it broad? Is it specifically focused on certain corridors?
Yeah, so we back people first and foremost. We back individuals who we believe have this third culture mindset. Obviously, there's a practical preference of investing in companies in the US because we understand the healthcare delivery system over here, and we have relationships mostly in the US, et cetera, et cetera. But we're generally open to innovations from abroad. In fact, we kind of pride ourselves in being outliers, backing outliers, and that's how our deal flow comes through, right? We meet some unique individuals who, have come across our networks at one point or another, kind of moved back to their country, went to school with someone, INSEAD or whatnot, end up in, traveling with a former classmate in somewhere in Southeast Asia. I'm completely, using the story you just told me, Shramana, prior to this call. But, through these opportunistic relationships, you end up meeting some really fantastic and very qualified people. And so from these introductions, sometimes we get to meet some phenomenal founders who have, again, this uniquely qualified backgrounds and having a third culture mindset and building solutions for healthcare delivery. And some of these solutions may fit initially in the US, but have the ability to scale globally at some point. And some of the solutions started elsewhere because the talent was elsewhere or the idea was elsewhere, but they're looking for soft landing in the US at the right time for us, where our check kind of is is stage appropriate for where they are, and then we can help them scale here in the US. So the short answer is that we are global by design, but from a practical standpoint, the majority of our deals have been in the US.
Okay. So now let's talk about healthcare specifically, and we could focus on healthcare in the US and what kinds of opportunities are you zeroing in on with these investments? And I would like to actually brainstorm a bit about the healthcare market in general, because, as I'm sure you believe, I also believe that healthcare is one of the biggest opportunities of this next wave of technology. All the AI and everything, every time you think about it, healthcare is one of the great unsolved problems that AI can really revolutionize. So what are you investing in? What are you seeing in the market as you get down to the dirt?
Yeah. So our thesis is around this notion of modern healthcare delivery meets health equity in a way. We are heavily inspired by the IHI, the Institute of Health Improvements, the work around population health. So they have coined this term, the quadruple aim, which has now become the quintuple aim in 2022. So there are 5 aims that they're looking at. The first aim for a greater society of better care delivery. The first aim is around how does a solution or how does a product improve outcomes for patients. The second one is how does it reduce the cost of care at a systems level. Mm-hmm. The third and fourth ones are about how do we improve the experience of care for both patients but also providers, right? How do we reduce provider burnout, et cetera, et cetera. And then the fifth aim that was released recently was around how do we optimize health equity? How do we provide better access so that we level the playing field for everyone? So we come from that framework when we look at companies and we screen them. And so for us, ensuring that the solution improves outcomes and is equitable for everyone, based on this framework is important, and it ends up helping the underserved and vulnerable communities. And oftentimes we see that the founders who build the solutions themselves come from those communities. So in a way, equity is somehow closely linked to diversity. We don't necessarily back people just because they're diverse. Again, if you remember, a definition of diversity is really about diversity of thought and diversity of experiences and backgrounds. But what's important to us is that whatever you're innovating around helps populations at scale, and particularly the most vulnerable. And so based on that, where I see the market for care delivery and opportunities in the future is clearly boundless, right? I think the pandemic has made us really realize that everyone is concerned, everyone is vulnerable to a pandemic. Um, I think that there is such interesting opportunities to innovate because of the tools that we have in AI. And we know that the market for healthcare in the US is around $4 trillion, whereas the global market is about 12 or so. So that's about a third in the US alone, right? And that's probably an underestimate of what the need is out there. Um, and I think a lot of this growth in the market and these opportunities because we have an aging population and therefore more vulnerable elderly, more vulnerable senior individuals. This is, there's been this improvement in science and understanding of biology, of physiology, of genetics that makes us so much better at identifying diseases a little bit earlier, and especially chronic diseases, because the ones we can fix, we fix, right? But the ones we can't fix become chronic. And so there's this surge in chronic conditions that we haven't yet found solutions for, but yet we have the technology. But the problem is that, the way commercialized innovations work is you're going to build solutions that can solve a problem, right? And so there's more therapies out there and there's much less prevention. And we have to do prevention as well. That's the reason why there's growth of chronic disease conditions, because we may have therapies for some discrete conditions, but we're not really working hard for prevention or understanding care delivery at a population's level. And then with the tools that we have today, AI, gene editing, et cetera, the opportunities is huge. And so I'm very excited about the deal flow that we get. I see incredible things, but we're definitely noticing patterns. And I think that's the second part of the question that you ask. And some of the patterns that we see is really around chronic conditions, equitable access and equitable care, so that we can provide care for everyone. That includes femtech, women's health. We're seeing a big pattern there of a lot of deal flow. And anything really around AI and how AI has an opportunity to automate care delivery. The last little anecdote I'll share here is I just came back from Toronto. I was at Collision, the conference, and there was this little poster next to one of the stages where it allowed people to walk by and put little stickers, and I'll stick them on the wall. And the question is, where lies the largest opportunity for AI? And there's like a 3x3 box, if I recall. But one of them was education. The other one was jobs or employment, future of employment. And one of them was healthcare. And literally everybody put it in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
I think people are realizing that there's so much potential for AI in healthcare in the future. I'm very enthusiastic about that as well.
Yeah. So let me comment on that. I would like to double click down on some of your companies, but I want to, on the broad level, I'm very bullish about education as well. I'm extremely bullish about healthcare, no question, AI in healthcare. But the trouble in education is that in the short to medium term, I think there is tremendous potential in education, especially personalized tutoring is something I'm very, very excited about, very bullish about. And Salman Khan is giving lots of talks about, what he is doing with Khanmigo. And I think personalized tutoring is an incredible opportunity. But in the long run, there is a big overarching question. what do we educate populations for?
Mm.
Right? If everything is going to be done by AI, and then what are we educating? Even coding is going to be done by AI. So what are we educating populations for? That's something that needs to be thought through at a much more intricate level, at a civilization level, at a humanity level, before we see what is going to be the future of AI in education. But I think the healthcare one is crystal clear that there is tremendous opportunity
Well,
to really build on it.
I mean, it is obvious to everyone, but crystal clear. I'm not sure what the path is, right? Because a lot of people get so excited about Gen AI, and Gen AI can replace physicians, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there's a whole corpus of an ethical framework that needs to exist in order for us to use machine and AI to actually provide direct care, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily trust that. There are certain things that AI has proven to be so good at. Now, even to some, there have been studies. I mean, at least one recent study, and we need to do more of them, that showed that measuring empathy, that AI could be just as good, if not better, than physicians from an empathy level. No, that has to be proven on the long term. But
Yeah, no, frankly, I'm actually less interested in general AI. Generative AI and general AI are not the same. That's
yeah,
an important distinction that we need to make. General AI, I think, is kind of an optional thing. If it happens, happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't really matter. Generative AI, however, is a powerful technology because being able to have conversations with AI gives us a lot of power to do things, in a more powerful fashion.
mhm,
In healthcare, though, one of generative AI's weaknesses is a major weakness, which is hallucination. It's okay
yeah,
if a generative AI applied to an education context is bullshitting about some historical event, and okay, the child is learning some bullshit, but
yeah.
you can do that in healthcare. You cannot go and prescribe some medication or diagnose some bullshit, right? Bullshitting is not acceptable in healthcare.
Yeah,
So,
it's okay to get an F on an exam, but you can't get an F on how you treat a patient, right?
exactly. Exactly. And the other thing on your empathy question, here comes the fundamental issue around AI is that why is it even necessary for us to replace all healthcare with AI?
Yeah.
What is really powerful, where AI is really capable, is really powerful, is in diagnostics and non-siloed diagnostics. Today's healthcare system everywhere, definitely in America, is extremely siloed, right? So you have some cardiac issues, there's a cardiologist office who's dealing with those. You have cancer, there's somebody else, and different cancers, different people are dealing with breast cancer, somebody is dealing with, blood cancer, somebody else is dealing with. It's very siloed.
Mhm.
Who is looking at the whole picture? And there, I think AI is far more capable of doing that than a human physician.
Listen, I completely agree with you. I think that, in the history of medicine, physicians have had to evolve, right, based on kind of new major paradigm shifts in how we do medicine. Like the whole, um, it used to be Galenic medicine where people would in antiquity and then the Middle Ages where people would, bleed people or like taste earwax in order to diagnose conditions. I mean, this was kind of what you had back in the days, right? And we've become more and more scientific. Have had, applied the scientific method in how we do research. Have evidence now that we rely on. But at the end of the day, the human brain is only able to connect like so many dots, right, compared to machine. And
Yeah.
so, if you were to compare like exactly as the example that you gave, looking at the body of evidence of 1,000+ studies on a particular types of breast cancers versus a physician's, even if they have 40 years of experience doing it, machine's going to do it better, right? But I think what we need is for the physicians to be able to kind of fine tune that, because if the machine is able to tell you a diagnosis, and this is an easy example, it gets very nuanced and complex, but this is an example that everybody can understand, right? If the machine is able to use all the knowledge in the world to try to identify what this particular condition is, or etc., and is able to rank it and give you likelihoods of this being a particular condition and what can be done, it's still up to the physician to use kind of more human ways of connecting things to make a decision of like, yeah, this may be the most likely diagnosis, or this may be the highest success rate for treatment. But in this 90-year-old patient, if we use this treatment, they're just not going to survive it. So I have to think differently, right? So
or the patient has something else going on in his system that is going to interfere with what the treatment that you're prescribing, and it's going to. So that's where personalized, really non-siloed, personalized, holistic medicine can be powered by AI as a physician's assistant. It doesn't even need to replace a physician. It can be a physician's assistant, and that's sufficient. And there already there's going to be tremendous impact. And I think that's where we need to reach. And on the nursing side or the care side, caregiving side, I think that this is not something that needs to be dehumanized and replaced with AI. Because I think the human factor is tremendously valuable in care. And AI is not, robotics. Robots don't find it so easy to do simple tasks. If the example that people give, technologists give, scientists give, is it's very easy for human beings to pick up a coffee cup or make coffee. It's not easy for a robot to do that. In robotics, that problem is a very, very complicated problem. And a little kid can do that. A little human kid can do that. And if you have to replace all of healthcare caregiving with robotics, that is a very complex problem. It will happen probably, but it is not something that is urgent. And it is not where I think AI is going to make the most difference. But in the medicine part of it, where it's diagnostic, treatment, etc., acting as a physician's assistant, it is going to be an enormously valuable help. AI can provide an enormously valuable help. So in that context, what companies have you invested in and what's going on?
So for Fund 1, we've invested so far in 15 companies. We're probably going to invest in another 2 or 3 before we kind of wrap up the investment period for Fund 1 and start investing out of Fund 2. But out of the 15 companies we've invested in since 2021, 11 of them are squarely into digital health across kind of different sectors or conditions, mental health, maternal health, amongst many. So that's 11 of them. One of them is a tools and manufacturing company, specifically for how do we make vaccinations a little bit more efficient and use certain biologics for vaccination. So that's kind of the simpler way of describing that. 2 of them are what we call tech bio, which is the application of data and AI for drug discovery, rather than biotech, which is more kind of traditional molecule discovery using chemistry, et cetera. Although there's a lot of kind of gray areas between what's biotech and what's tech bio today. But 2 of them are tech bio, and the last one one of the last ones we invested in is at the intersection of digital health and insurtech. So it's technology that powers, how do you kind of customize choosing physicians based on the insurance plan that you have. Really sophisticated and nuanced approach to which we think is the right approach for some populations. So we're very excited about this last investment. We're looking at companies doing mental health. We're looking at a computer vision company for kind of vascular conditions and vascular procedures. We continue to see a lot of mental health, and we're seeing a lot of kind of women's health technologies. I would say that those are kind of big buckets.
And these are all selling to hospitals?
So we're pretty open in terms of who the end user. I mean, end user usually is going to be the patient, but for us, we call it care delivery rather than particular sectors, because we see exactly we spent the last 10 minutes talking about AI and where AI could be applied, right? We just see that there's just so much convergence of how technologies can be used and how business models converge to provide better care delivery. And so TechBio is an example of that. The example I constantly give is if you've got a bunch of biotech veterans, who've been working 20 years in the industry, 20, 30 years in the industry, and say, you know what, like we've been doing it this way and it's just so slow and inefficient. There's got to be a better way. Why don't we hire a bunch of Google engineers, ex-Google engineers, and help us build, a platform for, using AI for drug discovery, right? So what is that? You call that probably biotech, because the founding team was from biotech. But if you've got a bunch of Google engineers, ex-Google engineers saying, we've got all the skills in the world, we know how to build products and do it really well. Instead of building the next fintech solution, why don't we apply this for human goods? And why don't we apply that for drug discovery? And they build the same engine, but they come from an engineering background. So, what do you call that? Is that TechBio? And that's, again, it's a simplistic example.
I'm asking a simpler question. Are these all B2B companies? As in businesses selling to hospitals or insurance companies or,
we do a little bit.
Companies?
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything. We have a few B2C, we have a few B2B. Or B2B2C, I guess, because again, end user oftentimes is the patient, right? And if you remember, one of our important screening criteria of the quintuple aim is how does it improve outcomes for patients? So we want to make sure that it somehow touches patients.
Yeah, no, everything touches patients eventually, but if you remember, I recently published very elaborate series on startup velocity, and I want to shift the conversation to the velocity question a little bit, because it is very very pertinent right now, and I'm having lots of conversations with investors and entrepreneurs on this topic. When we started 1Mby1M, there were maybe 6,000 venture funded companies at any given time. Now, at the end of 2023, that number just in the United States was 54,000. And when we started in 2010, India was not even on the map yet. India has exploded. Then Europe has really come up. Europe was also very, very nascent in terms of the technology startup industry. Europe has come up. Basically, in the last 14, 15 years, the whole startup industry, the venture capital industry around it has become a global phenomenon. And accelerators and incubators have exploded. There are 7,000 plus incubators, 3,000 plus accelerators. So there are probably 250,000 companies out there that have some form of financing. Maybe it's just pre-seed financing that didn't make it to seed, or seed, just a little bit of seed financing that didn't make it to, Series A. But there are probably 250,000 companies that have a little bit of financing. So this, if you look at what the venture capital industry has traditionally tried to do, is build really fast growth companies, to go from 0 to 100 million in 5 to 7 years. Now, 250,000 companies are not going to go from zero to $100 million in 5 to 7 years. It's impossible, right? That
Yeah.
kind of velocity is impossible to achieve with that many companies. That's an exception, not the rule.
Right.
So the question that I'm asking is how are you managing your portfolio? Are they achieving velocity? What are you seeing in your portfolio?
Yeah, I love this question. I think because we see seed and pre-seed companies, I get to see a vast amount of companies that are not really what I call startups. Well, it's VC backable startups. So let me start there, right? Because I think the question you're asking is like, of the startups, which ones are truly the ones that are going to achieve that escape velocity and kind of get to that 100 million, right? And that's something that some people even have struggle determining at a Series A, right? That's something that happens, Series A, Series B. But the earlier you can somehow find the signal that this company is on that trajectory, the better for everyone, right? So, but oftentimes I meet these great founders, and they're pitching me for early checks, and they may already or may not even have some friends and family capital. So, this is like super early stuff. And I tell them that there's startup and startup, there's business and business. There's absolutely no shame in building a company that's going to be profitable for you and build generational wealth for you and your family for the next 100 years, right? But that company doesn't have to be a startup. What I need to invest in
It's a startup.
is a
It
company.
doesn't have to be a venture funded startup.
Exactly. It doesn't need to be a venture startup. It is a startup. It's just, it's just not
Yeah,
as
we
a
have
venture.
advocate. You must have seen in the media. We have advocated very, very seriously bootstrap startups, and we have almost, as a forum, we have legitimized bootstrap startups. So today, bootstrap startups take a lot of pride. 10 years ago, the bootstrap startups used to apologize for being bootstrap startups. Today, they're no
Yeah.
more. I don't think.
Yeah. But even if you talk about bootstrap startup, you're still talking about startups that are VC backable. I mean, at least that's the interpretation.
No, why? Bootstrap startups don't have to be VC backable at all.
Sure, right. But so what I have to explain to a lot of these first-time founders is like my job as a VC, because when I start investing other people's capital, my LP's capital, the clock starts ticking, right? Like you need to exit within 10 to 12 years. Otherwise it's not a success for my fund and my ability to select. And so we have to be selective of these companies that are going to have a liquidity event within a certain period of time. And in order to achieve that, you need to show like rapid growth and be VC backable. And what's interesting, people don't realize that in my job as a VC, in order for me to do my job, I have to raise capital myself. Right.
Yes.
And so who do I go to? Sure, I go to pension funds and I go to fund of funds, etc. But I go to family offices. And guess what? Some of these family offices, how did they make the money that they made? Not because they were a VC backable startup, it's because they were making, light bulbs and this and that, and have grown extremely well. And they are the antithesis of a, startup, VC backable startup, but yet they are the ones funding, the venture capitalists of the future to invest in this company. So again, I say there's no shame in building a business if it's going to be successful, but you have to know that in order for 3CC to invest in your company, you need to fit a certain criteria, right, and be VC backable and achieve that escape velocity that you described so well.
But I think the reality is that because there's so much venture capital and so many funds now and so many accelerators and incubators, a very large number of companies are being put on this acceleration trajectory of trying to grow really fast. And once you bring this outside capital into the process, there's pressure to grow fast,
Yes.
right? And the entrepreneurs, there's pressure to grow fast. So, 250,000 companies with that kind of pressure to grow fast. So my question is, what's happening in your portfolio of 15 companies? Are they all growing fast? what kinds of challenges are they facing? How are you advising those companies?
Yeah. So um, this is how you have to kind of be able to visualize a little bit of the job of VC, right? The way I like to describe it is to have like a normal curve on top of a normal curve. The big normal curve is all the businesses out there, right? And I have to pick the ones that are at one end, the ones that are truly VC backable, and within that portfolio, within that kind of denominator, there is a normal curve there as well, right? So out of my portfolio companies, there are some companies that are almost within the first year, like, oh my God, they are incredible. Like one of our breakthrough companies already got an acquisition, an offer for an acquisition, and they declined it because they think that the money that they just raised, they can get to something larger. And that company, if they get to that number, is returning a fund. Just one company is
Right.
returning.
And that's how venture capital
That's how venture
operates.
capital.
One investment returns the portfolio and the rest are kind of incidental. But
the rest is like the rest is bonus, right? So if I can identify two or three of these portfolio companies kind of can achieve something like that within a 5 to 10 year period, that'd be fantastic. But then there's a normal curve within what I do too. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? You have 15 companies, and any statistician or anybody who knows what the normal curve is will go and look at those 15, and they will create a normal curve around that. And so there are winners within the winners that we pick, and there will be companies that won't perform as well. And so the question is, how do we allocate the right amount of capital? How do we put further fuel in the fire for the companies that are successful? And to address your point about all of these companies in the accelerators, I think that what one needs to be careful, especially me as a VC, is I have responsibility, right? I have a fiduciary responsibility to deploy my LP's capital into companies that are going to be successful and are going to exit. And so the question becomes, to make sure that that we continue to back the right companies at the right stage so that they can achieve something. It doesn't mean that we're not helping the companies that are struggling. And there are multiple anecdotes of companies that took 10 years in order to reach escape velocity, but when they did, they became unicorns, right? And so every trajectory is a little bit different.
NVIDIA almost went out of business at one point.
Which one?
NVIDIA.
Oh yeah, so
It's the most valuable company in the world right now.
Yeah, so but again, we would be missing on an NVIDIA. I mean, I'm not in semiconductor or anything, but what I'm saying is that because I'm a VC and I have a 10-year,
yes, of course.
So we would not have invested in NVIDIA, and so you miss out on these things. So yeah. So.
Okay, well, Julien, let's catch up offline and continue the conversation. It was a pleasure having you here, and we'll talk more later. Okay.
Oh, great. All right.
Yeah,
have a good one.
right.
Take care.